Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. Thank you for joining me for folks' favorite Fandom Friday. It really has been great to get back into recording these Fandom Friday episodes after a few series off, and I'm once again really enjoying the opportunity to visit with folks from the wider world of the Tolkien fandom, writers and musicians, craftsmen, scholars, artists, content creators, and more. And today, I'm sitting down with a Tolkien scholar who we were fortunate enough to have present a talk at PPP Moot back in 2022 on one of my favorite lesser-known works, Tal Elmar. Now, those of you who get the bonus episodes to the TTT might remember the dozen or so episodes I spent in that story through series 8 and 9. Clare Moore holds an MFA in creative writing, a BA in politics, philosophy, and economics, and is currently a Ph.D. student at the University of Glasgow, researching disability in Tolkien's Legendarium. And her essay, A Song of Greater Power, Tolkien's Construction of Luthien Tinuviel, won the 2022 Tolkien Society Award for Best Article. And really, aside from best online content, they just don't hand those things out. I mean, those are serious awards, again, except for present company excluded. Folks, please welcome Clare Moore to today's Tolkien Times.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you and great to see you again. I still remember that paper with just tremendous eye-opening, like, oh, this is great. And the fact that somebody else had even read it at all.
I think we are few in number, those of us who have found that text.
I think so. Now, I do have to ask my usual question for first-timers here. What was your first experience of Tolkien's works? And as a follow-up to that, what is it about Tolkien that keeps you coming back over and over?
Yeah, that's actually a very fond memory for me, as I'm sure it is for most people. So both my parents are big readers, not fantasy readers, but in the 90s, they knew that The Lord of the Rings was being adapted by Peter Jackson. Those films will be coming out soon. And so they read The Hobbit out loud to me and my brothers. So that was my first introduction to Tolkien. And then I went off, one of my brothers who is a voracious reader, like Eric. Also, we went off together to read The Lord of the Rings. A couple of my brothers, not voracious readers, but my parents were those kinds of people who had you have to read the book before you see the movie. So to read the book for my other brothers, my parents bought the 13 cassette tape dramatization.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we listened to that on road trips. And so we did all of that. And then when the movies came out, we got to watch them. So I was probably like that part of the generation that was like kind of like the last ones that really had a chance to read the books before, the movies were a possibility. But it kind of went sort of books, BBC, Peter Jackson, and from there it was session.
That's amazing because, of course, my opinion is that the BBC radio adaptation is the gold standard of all the adaptations in terms of just, it's so good. And what an opportunity. And you're right. It is interesting. It feels like as time passes, the larger percentage of people entering the Tolkien fandom will not be coming to it through the books. They might get there eventually, but they don't start there anymore. And that does change the fandom a little bit, but that's a question for another day. Today, I want to talk about what you're studying. You're studying disability in Tolkien for your PhD. I have to tell you that immediately rang a couple bells for me because I'm reading through the story of Turin right now on Turin Tuesdays. So my mind immediately went first to Sador with his amputated foot and Brandir, who is sadly more readily remembered for his disability than for his leadership of the Haladin. Talk to us a little bit about these two in particular, as their disabilities seem similar at first, but they're both viewed and treated very differently by Turin.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you picked characters from the Children of Hurin. And as far as disability and the whole Legendarium goes, that story is very special because it's by far the highest concentration of disabled characters out of any of the narratives. Almost everyone is disabled, and Brandir and Sadar are great examples. They are similar, as you said. So, and correct me, feel free to jump in if I'm misremembering.
Sure, of course.
So Sadar's, I think it's his right leg. He enters with an axe in an accident.
Correct. Yeah, and then the leg sort of, as it might do when your foot's amputated, it weakens and, atrophies over time as well.
Yeah. So that's his disability. Brandir also has a leg injury from a childhood accident. I forget if it's the right or the left.
I don't remember, but we're not given much detail in comparison to, say, Sador's injury. Yeah,
not as much. But yeah, so they both have leg injuries, which I think immediately sets them apart from some of the heroic
Yeah.
disabilities that we see. Beren, Maithros, even Frodo, all of their disabilities are in their hands, which has a
Hmm.
much stronger connection to their warrior status, especially at
Right.
this age. So I think the leg injury and that disability already sets them apart.
Hmm.
Sadar did fight, but
Yeah.
still significant that I think his disability didn't come from fighting. It came from an accident, just like Brandir. And that kind of sets them apart, especially since they're both so intimately connected with Turin, who
Yeah.
fights like the entire story once he becomes an adult.
Yeah.
So it kind of sets them apart right away. But I
Mhm.
think another value in their characters, especially in regards to disability, is not only their own experiences, but how people treat them.
Yeah.
Particularly Turin, it's very interesting. So he's very close to Sador as a child,
Hmm.
and his nickname for him is Hoppafoot, which is
Yeah.
related to his disability, but Tolkien is very careful in the text to say that this was a term of endearment and affection between them. And
Very glad he made that clear. I mean, and you could expect that from a kid. Like if you were a teenager and called him that, you'd feel like it was much more derogatory than, a 6 or 7 year old boy coming up with a name.
yeah, I think it is very affectionate when Turin's as a
Yeah.
child, which I think speaks to the fact that Sadar's disability doesn't bother Turin at all. They're still
No.
close. He spends a lot of time. He tries to help
Hmm.
Sadar make his life easier and do a lot of good things. Um, Of course, that's when he's a child. As he grows up, he goes through some
Yeah.
stuff, shall we say. And his perspective on disability by the time he meets Brandir is very, very different. Obviously,
Yeah.
he's become a much, much more bitter adult.
Mhm.
But I think Turin's treatment of Brandir, it gets increasingly worse. But towards the end, um, I think one of the most poignant moments is that he calls Brandir Clubfoot,
Yes.
before he kills him in cold blood. Um,
Hmm.
that's to me like a direct recall of his nickname for Sador, except this time we kind of see sort of all this bitterness and anger,
Yeah.
hostility towards Brandir's disability. So I think you can kind of see the journey that Turin goes on as far as his relationship to disability and disabled people throughout the narrative, and it's kind of
Yeah.
bookended by those two very important characters.
Boy, it sure is. And I'd forgotten about the clubfoot reference. And yeah, you're right. I mean, certainly, he tried to help Sador. He eventually tries to kill Brandir and succeeds. It's really tragic to see. Now, those are characters that are remembered for their disabilities. Like we think, and you mentioned others like Frodo and Maithros and Beren, who were having significant hand injuries. Can you give us an example or two of characters who we might not immediately think of as dealing with disabilities, sort of those hidden disabilities?
Yeah, there are a few, though I thought I would also pick one from the Children of Hurin.
Mhm.
So I thought I would briefly mention Nellis. I love her for
Oh
many
yeah.
reasons. She's not
Okay.
in the 1977 Silmarillion. You
Right.
have to go into the histories of Middle Earth or Christopher Tolkien's The Children of Hurin that came out
Right.
later. And
Hmm.
even in The Children of Hurin, which I think was maybe published 2007, but that
Sounds
version,
about right.
yeah, she's only in the text twice. So she's
Hmm.
an elf maiden. Tolkien describes her as an elf
Hmm.
maiden living in Doriath on her own in the forest. And she meets
Yeah.
Turin when he first arrives to live in Doriath as a child. So they meet when he's a child. And Tolkien describes her as kind of seeming no more than an elf maiden, no more than, Turin's own years. So she seems very childlike. Um,
Yeah.
and Tolkien obviously doesn't describe her in much more detail, nothing explicitly disabled. But I do think that to me, the way that Tolkien kind of frames his description of her seems like something
Yeah.
you might think of as a developmental disability.
Yeah.
When she reappears for her second and last appearance in the text in Doriath, Beleg brings her into the city, the
Hmm.
stronghold, to testify on Turin's behalf. And Tolkien describes how uncomfortable she is
Yeah.
in the city, in the stone, with all the people, essentially all the stimulation. And so
Right.
that also kind of speaks to a kind of neurodivergence,
Hmm.
and the relationship between neurodiversity and disability is a conversation that we cannot do in
No, not in a 12-minute
think that
show.
she qualifies.
Yeah.
And I like to think of her in that way because for me, she's
Yeah.
special because she's the only example in the text of a disability that's kind of she's born that way. That's a part of her character, her fan.
Yeah.
all these other disabilities, whether it's physical or psychological, Frodo, Sador, Brandir, they're all acquired during the narrative, whereas, now it's
injuries of some
always
sort.
that way.
That is interesting. That's I had completely forgotten about her. And you're right, folks. If you're not going to hear about Nellis in my readings this series, because I am reading from the Silmarillion version of the tale, but the Children of Hurin, or even I think she also appears in the Narn, which is in Unfinished Tales, is the only place you're going to find her. So we're going to move to some much more lighthearted questions in our lightning round. Who's your favorite Hobbit?
Frodo, but Merry is a very close second.
Merry's a good one. You can live in one place in Middle Earth and one time too, so you can pick an age. Where would it be and when?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to say Hobbiton. Obviously, I would love to live in Rivendell or somewhere else, but I think at the end of the day, I want to be in Hobbiton. And even though all of my research focuses on the first age, I definitely just want to live in Hobbiton in the third age. Just want to live quietly and peacefully in my little hobbit hole.
I might even say fourth age only because it's after Saruman. I don't have to worry about that.
True.
Did I hear you?
Yeah, avoid that headache.
Favorite moment in the Legendarium? That's a big question.
Wow. If I have to pick one, I mean, when I first read The Lord of the Rings, Eowyn had such a strong impact on me. I mean, like, long blonde hair. I grew up with all boys. It was just, her story resonated.
Fair enough.
So her standoff with the Witch King is probably still my favorite moment in the Legendarium.
Yeah.
But I will say, because
right
if you're familiar with my work, you know how much I love her. Luthien's song before Mandos is also, or song against Sauron is also very significant for me.
Those are all solid, and I'm not going to, give you trouble for having come up with three, because I would easily be challenged to do the same. So, your favorite author other than Tolkien?
That is actually an easy question for me. So my favorite series besides The Lord of the Rings is The Queen's Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. It is a fantasy series. She writes in a couple of ways that are interesting responses to Tolkien that she's talked about in interviews, and disability also features very prominent in stories. So I highly recommend everyone go out and read them. Not enough people have read them.
Now more people have more books to put on their to-read list. Good.
Always.
So what Tolkien events do you have on your horizon this year?
Yeah, too many probably. I was fortunate enough to be asked to co-chair two great events that are coming up this summer.
Okay.
So I am co-chairing the Tolkien Society's summer seminar with Journey Cotton and Will Sherwood. That will be July 5 and 6. The theme is Arda's Entangled Bodies and Environments. And that event is free. It is online. I'm sure they'll be sharing more information about that soon. And then with Cami Agan and Robin Reed, both great scholars, I'm co-chairing the Mythopoeic Society's online seminar in August. It'll also be online. It's August 2nd through 3rd. And that event is celebrating the 10th anniversary of the publication of Perilous and Fair, which is a great book.
It is.
Scholarship on women in Tolkien. It's hard to believe it's been out for 10 years, but
that does feel like it hasn't been that long. But yeah, it came out shortly before the podcast started, the PPP, not this show. And I remember reading it early on. That's 10 years. Wow.
Yeah, 10 years. So our title for the seminar is very cleverly More Perilous and Fair.
And 10 years from now, you call it Yet More Perilous and Fair.
Yeah, that'll be the 20th or the 25th follow-up.
All right, one last question. When do we get to start calling you Dr. Moore?
Wouldn't I like to know? I am finishing my second year into my PhD. I am doing it part-time. Unfortunately, I do not live in Scotland. I live in Washington, D.C. So I'm doing it part-time, which is around a 4 to 5 year track. So I'm probably about halfway-ish through. So still got 2 to 3 years before that.
Well, good luck. Clare, thank you again for joining us today. Before we go, can you remind our folks where they can find you if they want to read your work or anything like that?
Sure. You can find me on Blue Sky if you're over there. It's just Clare Moore, 914, which should be easy to remember. It's my name, and then 9 as in the fellowship, and 14 as in Thorin's company. So I'm nothing if not on brand.
That is very on brand. All right. Well, folks, that is it for today's Fandom Friday. But come back next Friday to meet another of your fellow Tolkien fans and maybe even learn what niches of the community you might be interested in exploring or studying. And if you're interested in joining me here for a future Fandom Friday, just let me know. Email barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show and get a lot of great extras. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we wrap up this week with Silmarillion Saturday. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel to make sure you get all of the PPP productions, including my new streaming project, The PPP Plays. And be sure you're following at Prancing Pony Pod on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.